repeatedly. I'm simply there being as quiet as I can be, not moving an inch, barely releasing a breath, observing this mad person. This goes on for about 25 seconds until the spin comes to an abrupt stop. I stare wide-eyed with thoughts racing in my head. What's going on? What the fuck is this? Should I? I'm thinking to myself, you got a camera. Don't be one of those idiots who don't capture the shit they so desperately brag about years from now on. Low battery, bars practically invisible, cheap-ass Walmart brand. Don't die on me. I reach for it and look up. And find him looking in my direction. I tell you, I saw no face. It was white, gray, whatever, like a doll. Was it a mask? I don't know, but I was terrified that I was discovered, pinpointed out from my cover. It was far from me, but it still managed to see me in like 4 seconds. So I stare slack jaw, slowly lifting up my camera. In that moment he or it lifts one wide arm out of its tarp and points at him. Just pointing at me from a distance, as if doing some ritual jest, then his arm drops slowly down. You know that scene from Shaun of the Dead where Shaun pushes the zombie chick onto the steel pole and she gets up, while it rotates the film reel on his camera? That's what I did. I lifted my camera up. Snap. Another one. Snap. Battery officially dead. Then I got up, slowly backed away and ran all the way back to the safe zone, and out a dozen trails and paths, crisscrossing to my exit. That was a crazy ass day, I must say. 2 revealment pics coming up. Picture 1. And second. Years ago I was camping/hiking with some friends on the Northern California coast near Jenner. Our camp was about 2 to 3 miles inland from the beach. We set up camp mid-afternoon. Some of us stayed at camp and myself with the others went to the beach. It was a beautiful clear day, about 77, no clouds, and not another person in sight. After dicking around for a few hours, a young couple in their early 20s approached us. They were very friendly, and out camping as well, although they didn't have very much gear. Anyway, we talked with them until the sun began to set. We didn't have flashlights on us, so we got back to camp while we still had sunlight. We invited the couple for dinner, but they remained at the beach to camp. It was a typical night camping with friends. Fart jokes, and what-if scenarios. It was so nice out we all slept out on tarps rather than in our tents. I got up at around 2 a.m. to piss. Everyone was passed out. I walked over to a tree on the edge of camp and proceeded to water it. Right as I finished I heard pop in the distance. A couple of the guys heard it too. We start talking and everyone else gets up. Half of us are STFU, it was nothing, go to sleep, and the others are WTF, let's get out of here. We eventually all go back to sleep, or at least just lay there in silence waiting for morning. At sunrise we cooked breakfast, packed our shit up and hiked back to the cars. It was probably a 5-mile hike back to the vehicles. We covered it fairly fast. The whole time we were speculating what the 2 pops could have been. When we got to the cars, local police, park rangers, and ambulance were pulling up. We asked what was going in, but they wouldn't give us a clear answer. But they all head off towards the beach on a service road. We pack up the cars and head for home, wondering even more about the 2 noises. Later that evening the news explains. A young couple camping on the beach were found shot through the head. No suspects, evidence, or witnesses. That must have been 15 years ago now. And I still wonder about it from time to time. No one else was out there. It was mid-90s, so no one really had cell phones, and if you did, there is no reception out there. I wonder if the killer called it in. We were all 16 to 19, no guns at the time too, for the record. I was backpacking through the Rockies once when I was in Boy Scouts. We had about 10 boys with us and 2 adults, and I was the crew leader, which basically means that despite me only being 16 at the time, I was in charge of pretty much everything, because our adults were lazy as fuck. So, after a long day of hiking we set up camp and got dinner going as fast as we could. Because there were bears and mountain lions in the area, we had to cook away from the camp and hang anything that had any fruit scent on it up high off the ground. But because we got a late start on cooking, we were only about halfway done cleaning before the sun was about to set. So, I had the guys get all the bags except the one for the dishes ready to go up in the trees and had them go to bed while I finished with the dishes. Camp was about 200 yards away. But in the dark and unfamiliar woods, that's a pretty long distance, and all I had on me was a 3-inch folder. Well, about 30 minutes after the sun was down, everything is clean and I go to hang up the bags and get them hung up without a problem. After I did that, for some reason, I got disoriented and a little lightheaded. Everyone in camp was already asleep and there were no lights on, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out which direction they were in. There was no moon, so besides my little mag light, it was pitch black. Then, I heard a low growl. I had momentarily crouched down, hoping to find my bearings, and when I heard it, the first thought in my mind was mountain lion. I immediately stood up to make myself as big as possible and pulled out the knife. I scanned around with my flashlight and saw two eyes staring back at me in the dark. I had always heard making a lot of noise around mountain lions just pissed them off more than anything and didn't really ward them off like it did bears. So instead, I grabbed the nearest, sturdiest stick I could find in anticipation of using it as a spear. I had to get back to the safety of camp. Alone, I'm fucked. But if there were others around, I knew it wouldn't bother me, so I quickly found one of my previous boot prints and started shuffling toward the direction of camp, never taking my flashlight off of the eyes following me. The mountain lion followed me, not surprisingly, keeping a distance of about, what I guesstimate to be, 25 yards between us. I shuffled, following my footprints, and found my camp. At that point, I got in my tent, feeling relatively sure that it wouldn't mess with 12 of us. The freaky part, I woke up the next morning, and there were mountain lion tracks just outside the front of my tent. I stayed up for 2 hours listening to see if that thing came near, and I didn't hear a thing. That thing waited until I was asleep. I posted a story about a year ago about how my friends and I find a weird man-made structure in the woods. I doubt if anyone remembers. But some shit happened recently, and on Sunday I had a pretty fucked up experience, so I'll give you the full story and what's transpired since. There's a small university in my town. About a mile woods. Students are always going to the lake, grilling, drinking, smoking pot, the usual college kid stuff. The campus security doesn't bother with it since it's so minor and it's not on campus proper anyway. I don't go there myself, but I have friends who do. One day he and a bunch of people go and have a campfire. Everyone there gets ridiculously drunk, including my friend. He decides it's a good idea to go in the woods and find a place to take a shit. It was still light out, so he wasn't scared. He drunkenly stumbles into the woods, going about half a mile in. That's when he came across some sort of man-made structure, almost a mini fort or a wigwam. It certainly stood out. He thinks it's weird and heads back to the fire. A few days later he told me about it. Naturally, I was curious and I asked him to show it to me. He ended up taking me out there. I found the whole thing fascinating. This fort was made very meticulously and carefully, the sticks being about the same length. Why would someone build this? How long did this take? And how did someone do it without being noticed? We have our look around and go. But I couldn't help but go back. I find the whole thing fascinating. I went back a few times. Things took a turn for the weird one of the times I came back. An animal skull, placed at eye level, stared back at me. Understandably, I was kinda freaked out. I left. I didn't go back into the woods after that. But I did drive by, park my car, and listen. I heard things, like the faint sound of drums. I didn't go back into the woods, until last Sunday. Months passed, and eventually my curiosity won out. It was just too weird. The fort, the skulls, the eerie noises coming from the woods. I had to know what the fuck was happening in those woods. The school year was ending soon, so I decided that my chances were slipping. Sunday seemed ideal. I dressed in dark blue, better than black at night. The human eye can detect the outline of black, filled my pack with water, an energy bar or two, my camera, a flashlight, and my knife. I didn't ask any of my friends to go with me. I'd asked them before and they refused each time. I also didn't want them coming out and pranking me for shits and giggles. I took my bike and rode it to campus and parked it and walked the mile to the woods. It was around 8 and the last vestiges of light were disappearing. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced darkness before, but this was real darkness. The lights of campus were a mile away and the woods were thick. Without my flashlight I was completely blind. To make matters worse, the forest was filled with fallen trees. We've had several nasty storms and even a tornado out that way, so entire trees had fallen down. I had to be careful not to fall and break my neck. It took me 20 minutes, but I eventually found a wigwam. I had noted this previously, and observed it once again. But curiously there were no cigarette butts, alcohol bottles, soda cans, or condom wrappers like you would find if students were coming out there. The dirt had markings in it, but they were scratched over, like someone kicked dirt over them to hide them. I walked about 20 yards past the fort, hunkered down, and waited. Hours passed and nothing happened. I sat there, swatting bugs, fighting boredom, and asking myself what the fuck I was doing over and over again. 5 hours passed in this way. Around 1 things changed. The sounds of the forest in front of me quieted. I saw lights in front of me, flashlights, 3 of them. I immediately got on my stomach. As they got closer I could hear voices, 2 guys and 1 girl. I watched as they made their way to the wigwam. They were talking but I couldn't hear what they were saying. They got under the fort and started busying themselves with something. Moments later I saw a fire spring up. I didn't know any of these people, although they looked to be around my age, early 20s. One of the guys was carrying a bag, and they kept getting shit out of it. When they pulled animal bones out, a chill ran up my spine. Things went downhill from there. The guys arranged the bones while the girl scratched something into the dirt. Their voices were still low, but it sounded like they were chanting in tandem. I don't believe in energy and auras and all that, but at that moment it felt like the entire forest was a giant cold spot. Their voices rose, their chanting continued, and I shot a brick. Then the fire went out. They didn't kick it out or pour water on it. This was instantaneous, like someone snuffing out a candle. The temperature seemed to drop even more. I started shivering and couldn't stop. It felt like my fucking bones were freezing. I covered my mouth with my hand because I was afraid they would hear my teeth chattering. The last thing I wanted was for these people to know someone was watching them. I listened, and in the pitch blackness I could hear the girl talking. It didn't seem like she was talking to one of the guys, but someone new, as if a new person had just dropped out of the sky. That's when I heard the sound that I will never forget, the sound that's already wormed its way into my nightmares. It was like someone was trying to breathe, but their throat was damaged or slit. It was ragged, loud, and to my ears, inhuman. I had a sound that echoed through the forest and nearly made me piss myself. If I was scared before, I was nearly catatonic with terror at this point. Never before had I heard such a horrifying noise. At that point my brain and body were screaming at me flight flight flight, and I thought it best to comply. Slowly, I turned myself, got into crouching position, and walked as carefully as I could. It was pitch black in this woods, and in my mind if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. The chanting had started again, and to my horror those gasping, dying breaths punctuated those chants. I got about 10 yards when I had my cliché moment. I snapped a twig under my foot. Immediately the chants stopped. The breathing noises stopped. I could hear one of the guys say "what the fuck?" Then the breathing, the gasping, the awful cries started. And then, even worse, they got louder. They were moving toward me. It was at this point I went into maximum nope mode. I couldn't run, because I couldn't go 5 feet or so without tripping over a tree or a root. I got out of crouching position and fast walked as fast as my body allowed, feeling ahead of my like a blind guy. I don't think you can imagine how terrifying it is to not be able to run away from something when every fiber of your being tells you to do just that. I kept going. Duck or crawling under fallen trees, as fast as I possibly could. To me, it sounded like the breathing was gaining, but in my drift state I couldn't be sure. It was at this point the cultish trio finally came to their sense. I looked back and could see them switch on flashlights. My first thought was that's it for me. I did the only thing I could. The next fallen tree I wedged myself under it, threw some fallen leaves on me, and wedged myself as far into the dirt as I possibly could. I don't think the trio knew which general direction I had gone, because they never really came close to where I was laying. But the breathing persisted. That disgusting, guttural hay seemed to be all around me. I had to hold my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't give away my location. I thought for sure whatever the fuck that horrible voice belonged to would eventually find me. Again, hours passed. The breathing persisted. I wanted to see if the flashlights were near me, but I was too scared to sit up. Eventually, the breathing stopped. I had a crash, that is to say I had so much adrenaline pumping through my body moments before that I was exhausted,